images like this, a giant footprint in rough granite, you realize of a being that was about 7.5 meters tall. You realize that we don't even understand our own geology, because you should not be able to leave a footprint in granite. So all geologists will jump up and down and tell you that you're an idiot, you can't leave a footprint in granite. I know. This is why it's such an anomaly. Why is it, how can you leave a footprint in granite? And then you start researching it, realize that there's a lot more to the story. And I was there recently, and I took 3 samples of this particular rock. I took a sample from right here, down there where a piece broke off. I took a sample from around the corner, and then another sample from the bedrock all the way down the bottom of the mountain. Now I can tell you that there's 3 different types of granite that I found. And it seems to be consistent with the findings of Sam Osmanagij at the Bosnian Pyramid, that the granite up here is actually some sort of a reworked polymer, that it's not the original bedrock. Now I can't say that for sure, but the samples that I collected are screaming loudly that that seems to be the case. Once we have it analyzed, I'll share that information for $1. The other exciting thing is, this is Klaus Donner. You may know Klaus Donner. He's in Vienna. He's a wonderful researcher, one of the most amazing researchers in unresolved ancient mysteries. And Klaus actually found the bones of a giant in Ecuador that was 7.5 meters tall. And this is a real giant. It's been scientifically proven that these are bones of a being that would have been 7.5 meters tall, about this size. Or if his size would have left a footprint about that size. And this is why this journey of discovery is so exciting. The other exciting thing about this journey of discovery is that you realize that these ancient sites are much older than most of us realize. And this is a great example. Because this stone here used to be the twin of this stone here. There you can see it. It's lying over there. It fell down and broke. It broke over there. They used to be connected at the top, apparently. And when it fell, it broke. And you can see, that's the break. Now, when I first went to Stonehenge, I couldn't believe it. I kept asking the people that know, I said, are you sure this is the stone that was connected to this one and then it fell and broke? Yes, that's a stone. So I said, well, in that case, we got a huge problem here, because if that's the break, this is sarsen stone. It's one of the hardest stones known to earth, known to mankind. And if this is only a few thousand years old, it's impossible for the stone to have eroded 2 feet. 2 feet of erosion on sarsen stone in a few thousand years, forget it. It's not possible. This kind of erosion can only happen in probably way over more than 1 million years. So we're dealing with ancient times. Why Stonehenge is still there, I don't know. I'm not telling you why it's there. I'm just telling you that the geology tells us that it's incredibly old, and not just built by a bunch of druids to get drunk and go and wait for the sunrise on the solstices and the equinoxes because they've got nothing better to do. I don't think that was the case here. And this is another example. One of the lintels has got a huge crack through it, and the erosion there is deeper than my hand. Again, just showing us that we're dealing with extreme ages here, not only a few thousands of years. Once you start looking for the origins of humankind, it doesn't take long before you realize that sound and resonance are the common denominators in all ancient belief systems, in all ancient cultures. If you don't find it at first, as you start scratching through the belief systems and you start listening to these ancient cultures and their storylines, sooner or later you're going to hear that word, resonance, or the sound of God, or the sound of the Creator. And that's the bingo. That's the aha moment. That's the moment you realize that you found the golden thread that holds all of creation together. Sound and resonance. In Christianity, we have the word. God said, let there be light. God didn't say anything else. God said, let there be light. And we see the connection between sound and light. Very important. In Hinduism, we have the primordial Om or Aum, the sound and the resonance that brought everything into creation. The Egyptians believed that the universe was sung into creation. And one of my favorites is actually the Aboriginal story of the 3 sacred songs that brought everything into existence. It's fantastic. And if you start looking at all the others, you'll see the same story. In Christianity, we have the 6 days of creation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And on the 7th day, God rested. Isn't that amazing? Just like that, we find a connection between the biblical creation and sacred geometry. But that's not all. In Hinduism, we have the 6 aspects of Om, the Om Mani Padme Hum. And in Egyptology, we have the 6 aspects of the all-seeing eye of Horus. And we start realizing that this number 6 and numerology and numbers play a very important part in all of this creation that we get out of resonance and sound. And for anyone that understands music and harmonics, you'll see very quickly that this is all harmonic resonance principles. Very simple. And you go, oh my goodness, this is what they mean when they talk about the all-seeing eye of Horus, which is actually the pineal gland, and what the all-seeing eye of Horus actually represents, because this is a frequency receptor in the middle of our head. The internal organs and structure of the pineal gland are the same as your eyes, except it's in the middle of your head. Rods and cones inside that pick up all kinds of frequencies. It is your third eye. It is your connected to everything in creation. It is supposed to give you ESP, extrasensory perception, that you are in connection with everything in creation. But that's what was severed from our beingness by these ancient beings. And that's why they encoded in these symbols that go back thousands of years in ancient societies by the priest kings that were first lowered to earth from heaven and given fierce weapons to rule the people. What is sound? Most of us think of sound as a line on a whiteboard. Oh, this is sound. They teach you at school, right? This is what sound is. Look, there's a sine wave. You see, it's sound. No. That's where the problem begins, because now we all look at this, and for the rest of our lives, we see sound as this bloody twisting line on a piece of paper or on the board. And that's where the confusion begins and carries on. Sound is a 3-dimensional effect that goes on forever. Just because you can't hear it anymore doesn't mean it has stopped. The moment you make a sound, it goes on in 3-dimensional, in all space, and as a bubble out of your mouth, and it continues. And just to show you the beauty of human voice, Helene, can you just double-click on that? Thank you. This is the work of John Stuart Reid and his partners and the cymoscope, just to show you the infinite number of shapes of sound as sound manifests into physical form. Every frequency has its own very specific shape. And there are an infinite number of these. It's just really beautiful. When you see the three-dimensional bubble cut in half, and you look at the cross-section of it, you very clearly see, can you see the cross there in the middle? And you start seeing the inspirations behind the crosses and the religious symbols that most specifically Christian denominated religions have. And when you drill deeper into some of these images, these cymatic patterns of sound, it becomes even more obvious what these guys knew, because you find this, a cross in a circle and you realize that this cross in a circle being the source of sound was the inspiration for the symbols when they came up with them for the religious denominations, telling us that they actually understand cymatics, they understand source, they understand resonance, and they hid it in the symbols with which they then keep oppressing and enslaving the people. Even the medicine wheel in Native American culture is just a cross in a circle, telling us that sound heals. And they're absolutely right. Sound does heal. Because if sound is a primary source of all things, then we should be able to use sound for everything. And that's exactly what we're dealing with here. Sound levitates, it boils water, it creates light, it creates DNA, it heals, it destroys pathogens. It's the precursor to electromagnetism, and this is an important thing. Sound causes electromagnetic effect, not the other way around in the universe. And this is amazing because when all of this starts falling into place, everything can be explained. We can truly start to understand everything about the atomic structure, from the smallest atoms to everything in creation, to the galaxies and the universes and the meta-universes, and how it all fits together. And we can also start to recognize when something has gone wrong. Because when we understand the harmonics and the resonance of it and how it should behave, we can see when it's gone wrong, and then we can do something to fix it. And that's exactly what vibrational medicine and vibrational healing is all about. So this guy, Peter Davies, he's been boiling water with sound since 1940. He died about 2 years ago, and he took his secret to his grave. And it's a great shame. The only reason he took his secret to his grave is because of money. He was waiting for someone to put money into his device so they could manufacture it, put it into production lines, and sell it to people around the world so he could make millions of dollars. And unfortunately, we are none the wiser, and we're all speculating how the hell this Spitfire pilot could boil water with sound, and thousands of scientists and millions of scientists around the world have not been able to replicate this. It still boggles my mind. And I've been talking about this guy now for 5 years, and nobody has gone out there, or scientists that's got access to laboratories, to all this stuff, they haven't gone out to try and replicate this. And I don't understand what the problem is. So that's just my message. If you know anybody with a laboratory and access to technology that can do this, for God's sake, go out there and boil the water, measure the frequency, the resonant frequency of boiling water. Don't try and, start from reverse engineer the process, and then apply that frequency to water and see what happens. My guess is it'll probably boil. And this guy here, Luc Montagnier, amazing scientist, French scientist, in 2011 spontaneously created DNA with sound. He took one test tube, filled it with water and DNA, and he took another empty test tube with water. He submerged them into water, not too far from each other, and exposed it to 7 hertz. Interesting number, that's 7 hertz, isn't it? We get back to those 7 days of creation, right? 6 days of creation and sacred geometry. He exposed it to 7 hertz, and very shortly afterwards, DNA spontaneously manifested in the empty test tube. Sound manifests reality. It's fantastic. It's the same as when you put sand on a metal plate and you put a sound frequency through it, and you get these beautiful patterns that are created on the metal plate. Same thing, except this is in 3D, in a test tube, manifesting DNA. When you take a laser beam and a frog's egg, and you shine a laser beam through it, and you shine it into a lizard's egg, the light picks up the DNA from the frog's egg and it deposits it in the lizard's egg, and the lizard's egg turns out to be a frog. The light picks up the frequencies and the energy from the DNA in the frog's egg and deposits it. So this is how we can start seeing how we can use sound and resonance and our knowledge of that to manipulate our own reality. It's a very exciting period to be alive. And just to show you that sound does much more than that. Sound actually levitates. Just be careful, this might be a little loud. The sound...
They should look up code meditation. Smart. You didn't want to go get sick.
Slightest frequency shift and it starts to spin. So with the smallest manipulation of shift in frequency, you can make it bop up and down, spin, tumble, whatever you want. I had a 1.5 hour chat with David Deek that did this about 2 months ago. We spoke for about 2 hours, and he explained to me exactly what they did, how it works, and all about the standing waves and so forth. It was a really interesting discussion. But what I can tell you is that this is not how the ancients did it. This is just a demonstration what you can do with sound, and that sound does levitate. But unfortunately, using it this way, you will not levitate huge 10-ton blocks of stone, because you can't create enough energy to create the standing waves to move them and levitate them. They used a whole different approach to sound because they understood it. And this is, we don't have enough time here tonight, but this is very exciting. If you want to go and do some research on it, it's called hypersound. Hypersound, when sound moves beyond the speed of light. One of the best kept secrets in physics. Sound travels beyond the speed of light. Wow, isn't that a bit of a mind warp? So, sound is free energy. This is really important for us to understand. Sound is free energy. It is probably the most abundant source, not probably, it is the most abundant source of free energy in all of creation and on our planet, because Mother Earth rings like a bell. And this is one of the most ignored statements that Nikola Tesla made. The earth rings like a bell, and if you know how to tap into that sound frequency of the earth, you'll forever have an insatiable source of energy that you can convert to any kind of other energy that you want, as long as you know how to do that. And this is what I believe he did, and this is what I believe he tapped into the sound frequency of Mother Earth, and what he did with it up there is still out for discussion. That's what everyone's looking for. That radiant source of energy that goes through everything at infinite pace and doesn't kill you when you accidentally put your hand in there, because it's not dangerous, and yet it lights up everything we can imagine. So what does this all have to do with ancient civilizations? Everything, because they understood all of this stuff. They understood resonance, they understood sound and frequency, and they used it as a source of energy. And this is what leads us to linking what we find in ancient times to a modern day levitator that lived at the bottom of Florida. His name was Edleitz Cullen, and in the 20s he built this spectacular place all on his own, single-handedly, with huge blocks of coral. That's why it's called Coral Castle. And he did this single-handedly, cut them, he put them into place, and somehow he managed this on his own, without ropes and pulleys. Okay, always say, well, there's ropes and pulleys, everything. Stonehenge was built with ropes and pulleys, and it's always ropes and pulleys are the greatest invention in ancient times. And Edleitz Cullen did this all on his own. It is impossible for one person on your own to do this. And one day he was seen by two schoolboys, apparently, going on their way home from school, and they saw him levitating these huge blocks. They got very excited about this. They got home and they told their parents, we saw the man levitating these blocks. He was moving them through the air. And when the parents asked, well, how does he do it? The boys said he did it with ice cream cones in his hands. And the parents got very upset with the boys and said, naughty, you're lying to us. Stop lying, making up stories. Go to your room. No ice cream for you. Well, I don't think they were lying, because this is exactly why I now call it the ice cream cone phenomenon. And it's very exciting, because I've been finding ice cream cone type stone tools around the stone ruins all over Southern Africa. From where I live in Waterval-Boven through Botswana to Zimbabwe, ice cream tools everywhere. I don't pick them all up, I only collected a few of them, but I think I photographed well over like 40 of them. And then in Egypt, suddenly you see ice cream cone-shaped tools appear, and no one's ever been able to explain these. They always give you some feeble excuse of what it is. So it was ornamental, it was this or was that. Well, we don't know. We'll just make stuff up. No, I don't think so. So there's all these things are very important roles to play in ancient societies. And when I saw this, I just got extremely excited. And I even recently found cone-shaped tools in an ancient mine in England. And you start seeing it everywhere. You find it in the Bosnian pyramid. Samos Managij they've been pulling out cone-shaped tools there. The Native American priests, medicine men, when they have ceremonies in the kivas, they take cone-shaped tools. And guess what they do with them? They hit them together to make a ringing noise as part of their ceremony. And nobody knows why they do that, because they've lost that knowledge now. But I can tell you that you'll know by the time we finished here. And then I found these in the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose, California, which blew my mind. These are cone-shaped tools that were retrieved from the walls of a Sumerian temple in Sumer, with cuneiform text that tells us that these cones were made to commemorate the building of the temples. And you start seeing the connection. Cone-shaped tools that were used by Edlitz to levitate these giant 5-ton, 10-ton blocks of coral. And suddenly the plot thickens. And this brings us to Southern Africa, where history books tell us and claim that Southern Africa was a sparsely populated part of the world with hardly anybody living there, some hunter-gatherers, and they run around with their loincloths and shoot a buck here and shoot a buck there, very happy. But unfortunately, the stone ruins and the ancient ruins of Southern Africa tell us a completely different story. They tell us that it was a densely populated part of the world with millions of people living there. And unfortunately, for those that are doing research into the stone ruins, these stone ruins are often called cattle kraal. Now, is kraal a word in Dutch? A kraal? So you'll know what I'm talking about. A cattle kraal where you keep cows in. And this is what they put in our history books, and they teach it to everybody because that's what it has to be. It's got to be a cattle kraal. Well, you'll find out that that's not necessarily the case. Because just to show you some of the images of these ruins, first you'll find that all of them are circular, and yet each one is completely unique. They have very unique internal structures. Look at all the stuff in between. There's a lot more stuff lying. There's another circle there. All the stuff here. It's buried by soil. And unless you look at it from the air, you won't even know that it's there. Sometimes I'll walk between these ruins, and I come home and I look on Google Earth, and I went, oh my God, there's some more ruins there. I was walking right there, and I didn't even know I was walking through some ruins. And that's how covered they are. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. All depends what time of the day it is, where the sun is. And notice that at the circular, the actual, what we call stone circles, the stone circles are surrounded by much more that seems to go out of it, it's like a spider's web that moves out away from the stone circles. And you can see here that there was some other stuff going on here. This one was connected to that one, but it's eroded over there. You can no longer see it, and it just goes on. This one is connected to another ruin over there, which you'll see from another angle. But from this photograph, you'll never ever say that there's more stuff around it, because it's buried by soil. And here, same one here. When you're looking at this ruin here, you have no idea that this is attached to it over there. And when you start seeing a horseshoe shape with a circle inside it, with a rock right inside the middle of it, you start going, hold on, I can make a connection here between electronics and horse-shaped shoes and stuff like that. Look at all the stuff on the outside of the stone walls. There's another horseshoe-shaped structure, ohm-shaped structure. And the warning bells go, aha, ohm-shaped structure, frequency, resonance. Here's that ruin that I said you can't see anything from right above it. Look all the stuff there. See how this is connected to that one. There's a whole network of ruins between these two, but you can't see it from straight above. Only at a certain time. And then they make beautiful flower shapes, because flowers are pretty. So they make flower-shaped stone ruins, because when you look at them from the air, they look so pretty and make everybody happy. But you have to be up in the sky to see that they look like flowers. And that poses a bit of a problem. And can you see how it's connected from there to here? And then that connection goes to this channel here that is even more eroded. And what's so special about these ruins? Not just that they're pretty to look at, but they obviously made for very special cows, these cattle kraals. And I think that it's possibly where the term holy cow comes from, because these cattle were very, very demanding, and they insisted that these cattle kraal were aligned with the movement of the sun. These were holy cows. They wanted to know where the sun came up, and they debated this, obviously. And you realize that when you start looking at these, not only are they aligned to the movements of the sun and the equinoxes and the solstices, but also with very advanced knowledge of sacred geometry. And when you start seeing hexagons and equilateral triangles come out of these stone circles and star tetrahedrons, you know that whoever built it for a very specific reason, and not just a place to observe the sun or for cows. The other important thing are the channels, these roads. These channels that connect all these stone circles together. Between the spider's web effect here, these channels run and they connect everything together. There are no stone circles that stand alone. They're always part of a much larger network. And there's some other weird stuff here, but no time to go into this. These weird hexagonal structures that just make no sense whatsoever. Like a honeycomb hexagonal cluster of stone ruins. I mean, once you built it, how the hell do you get into it? What is it for? What do you use it for? No doors and entrances, just a giant hexagon. I mean, a honeycomb structure of hexagonal stone ruins. This is a beautiful example of channel connecting. And so it goes. Now, the other fascinating thing, remember, our history books tell us that Southern Africa was sparsely populated. Nobody lived, very few people lived there. And yet, other history books tell us that there are 450,000 square kilometers of agricultural terraces. There's a bit of a problem. Sparsely populated, nobody lives there, and yet somebody built 450,000 square kilometers of terraces. What the hell were they building the terraces for? Who were they feeding? Who built it? What were they planting, and why? And when you start looking at the terraces, they're all over the place, and it takes a little while for your eyes to desensitize and start recognizing it, and suddenly it becomes very exciting, because you see them all over Southern Africa. And this is just up the road from our house. You know where this is, Ton? Yeah, so it's just, it's just a spectacular display of a vast, vanished civilization that we know absolutely nothing about. From this point here, up on the mountain, pretty much between 60 and 100 kilometers in all directions, it looked like this a long time ago. There are still large areas that look like this. And the other important thing to note, which our cattle kraal historians keep forgetting, is that our cattle kraals have no doors and entrances. So clearly, they must have been putting the cattle in over the walls at night, because they were very special cattle and they didn't want anyone to steal them. And I'm not kidding you. Many of the ruins have been manipulated and have been changed and adapted for people to live in. So this is a big problem. So you see civilizations building on top of each other, moving in, saying, wow, great, we'll live here, thank you. And they make doors and they make entrances and they use the place. And they, of course, use them for cattle as well. But some of them have got very narrow doors. And this is one of my favorite stories. I kid you not. This is how desperate our historians and archaeologists are, how desperate they are and how they make up stuff just to fit their belief system. So some of these stone ruins have got very small, narrow entrances. So they came up with a story that the people in these ancient times had dwarf cattle. Kid you not. I'm not lying to you. Go look at the history books. Important thing, no doors and entrances. There are several archaeological drawings that clearly show us no doors and entrances, clustered together like grapes with the channels connecting them all together, like I've showed you, everything is connected. And sometimes they have concentric walls that are connected together. This is from an archaeological study in 1939. I didn't draw this. So what is all this activity all about in Southern Africa? It's always about the gold, people. Always about the gold. You cannot separate human history and the origins of humankind from our obsession with gold. But the exciting thing, as I discussed earlier today, is that we can breathe a giant sigh of relief because it's not our obsession with gold. So we're not the guilty ones. We got our obsession for the gold from the gods, or the biblical Elohim, which most of you should know by now. The word God in the Bible comes from the Hebrew Elohim, which is a plural for the gods, or the beings that descended from the sky, or something like that. It's got all kinds of meanings, all depends who you listen to. But it's never a singular, it's always a plural. So whenever you read the word God in the Bible, you've got to translate it into its original form, and it is the gods, plural. And when Adam was alone on earth in Genesis 2, it's not Adam, the first human being on earth, that said, I want gold. No. It's God, or the Elohim, that come to Adam and say, hey, buddy, I'm going to tell you about this place called Havilah, where the land is good, the water is good, and by the way, there is gold. It's the gods that told humanity about the gold. And that changes things quite dramatically, I believe. So what do the ancient texts tell us about all this time in human history, about Adam and the origins of humankind and the gold? Well, all of this information that we find in the Bible, we first get in the Sumerian texts. Millions of Sumerian clay tablets. For those of you that don't know, it's not just a handful of them, millions and millions of Sumerian clay tablets that are in existence. Not all of them have been translated, but dozens of thousands have been translated. Snippets of them have been translated, and they all tell us a very interesting story. One of the most compelling things about the Sumerian text, about the Anunnaki gods, or the Anunnaki, as Zechariah Sitchin called them, probably more accurately because they call themselves the gods of heaven and earth. Anunnaki, ki for standing for earth. And we read about the Anunnaki, what they did and how they created humanity, and about their work in the Abzu, where the gold came from. This is one of the most commonly misunderstood expressions in the Sumerian text, the Abzu. But the most commonly referred to place that the Abzu was is where the gold came from. So if we can find where the gold came from, I guess by reverse engineering or reverse argument, we'll find where the Abzu was. This is one of the translations. This comes from Sitchin. In the Abzu, Enki plans was conceiving where to build his house, where for heroes, dwellings to prepare, where the bowels of the earth to enter, to get the gold. And then they needed a slave race to dig for the gold. And you realize where our symbol for medicine comes from. It is one of the most mysterious, the most occult, most deeply encoded symbols in all of human history, the caduceus. It is so critically important to our enslavement as a species. I don't think I can stress it enough. The more I research this, the more disturbing, actually, I can say, the more disturbing it becomes as to how deeply encoded that symbol is, with all the information about our enslavement as a species on every possible level you can imagine. And this is why this symbol is often connected to the Sumerian entity Enki, who is said to be the creator of this new species called the Lulu Amelu, or primitive worker. So it says, let us create a Lulu, a primitive worker, the hardship work to take over. Let the being, the toil of the Anunnaki carry on his back. So they're talking about the Anunnaki, a being called the Lulu, the primitive worker that they're creating to take over the hardship work from the Anunnaki in the gold mines. So is there a ruin or a settlement that could be linked to Enki? Great Zimbabwe. Absolutely. It is so encoded with Enki energy that it truly boggles your mind. And if you don't understand about the measurement of energetic imprints, it's something you need to go and research for yourself, because we don't have time for that right now. But what I can tell you is that Great Zimbabwe is what I often call the White House on the hill. The big White House where the mine manager lives in, on this vast gold mine in ancient human history. And guess what? Nothing has changed. I grew up on the gold mines in South Africa, and the mine manager always lives on the big house on the highest hill. If you want to look for the mine manager on the gold mine, you look around, oh, there's a big house on the hill. That's where the mine manager lives. Well, this was Enki's big house on the hill in Zimbabwe, where he controlled not only the gold mining empire, but many other things that were going on there. And I can tell you that this is vastly unexcavated and unexplored. The last excavations took place at Great Zimbabwe in 1939. There is stuff hidden there that they do not want us to know about. And just like in Crimea, the military swoops in when they find ancient artifacts. The same thing happened in Iraq, in the desert. They swooped in. They raided the Iraqi museum. Within 48 hours of the first bombs falling on Baghdad, the Iraqi museum was raided by giant black CIA trucks that took out all the ancient artifacts out of the Baghdad museum. It's become a war of controlling ancient technology, people. And you'll understand why I say this when you realize what we're dealing with here, what Adam's calendar is, what all these ancient ruins are. So, to understand how big this ancient gold mining empire of Enki was and what the Anunnaki were really up to, and I must tell you that I cannot even stress enough the influence that the Anunnaki had on the entire reality that we face today. The influence not just on the human affairs, but on affairs on this planet probably for millions of years. And this is a spectacular bit of information that unfolds as you get deeper and deeper into this research. It is quite spectacular. The Anunnaki seem to be these beings that are possibly multidimensional beings at this stage, and they love the physical form, and this is why the obsession with gold. Okay, we're not even going to go there. Because remember, they weren't obsessed with the gold for its shiny metal because they could trade with it. No, they were interested in the gold because of the monoatomic form, or the white powder of gold, or the manna from heaven, or the bread of God, or the muftak, or the many names that it's been given over the years. The white powder of gold, the monoatomic form of gold that has very uncanny properties in our reality here. Levitation, transmutation, it vanishes from reality. It goes into a different dimension between 700 and 800 degrees Celsius. The white powder of gold, a little pile of it starts to disappear in the laboratory, and by 800 degrees it's gone. Gone. And you sweep the little, this is David Hudson's research, and you sweep the little plate where the pile of white powder was, and just in case you can't see it, but it's still there. And when you reduce the temperature, it keeps coming back. The white powder reappears. And so it's got some very interesting cladding properties, the monoatomic gold. And that's what the Anunnaki were after. It's got healing properties. It seems to align your DNA. It cures all disease, all this kind of stuff. Okay, this is why when Moses came down from the mountain, and remember they were in the desert for how many years already, the Israelites. How true that story is, who knows, but the information we get in it is very important. So when Moses comes down from the mountain, the Israelites build a golden calf, right? And he's very angry, and he takes the calf and he burns it in the fire. What happens to the golden calf in the fire? It doesn't turn to molten gold, it turns to white powder. Wow, that's interesting. And not just once, twice. It's in Exodus and in Leviticus. We read how Moses turns the golden calf into white powder. And then what does he do? He takes the white powder, he puts it in the water, and he feeds it to the Israelites. I guess it tells us that it's got healing and curing properties, because by then they probably weren't very clean without water and food and sanitation, and they were probably riddled with disease. So he gave them the white powder to keep them pure and keep them clean, and maybe cure some of their diseases. Who knows? You make up your own mind what he did and why he gave them the white powder. But how many of these ruins were there in this vast gold mining empire in the Abzu? In 1891, Theodore Bent, this is the inside of Great Zimbabwe, by the way. There's the famous conical tower that they broke down because they thought it was filled with gold when they first found it, only to be disappointed. And if you just look at that conical tower, what is it? It's just a giant ice cream cone facing the sky. And there was another one somewhere here. And you realize, when I was at Great Zimbabwe just recently, the whole place is filled with cone-shaped structures. Every ruin has at least one little cone-shaped structure facing the sky. And it starts to tell us that there was probably some very interesting activity going on there. So, sorry, by 1891, Theodore Bent, one of the first to truly excavate Great Zimbabwe, estimated that there were 4,000 of these ruins. So that's, I can still deal with that. 4,000 ruins, sparsely populated part of the world. You know, everybody built himself one cool ruin. I can handle that. And then we get to 1974, and Roger Summers, at that stage, he was the head of antiquities in South Africa and Rhodesia, because it was known as Rhodesia then. That wonderfully beautiful human being called Cecil John Rhodes found this piece of land, and they named it after him in his honor. It's a spectacular moment in human history. I hope you realize that I'm joking. Cecil John Rhodes, my favorite man to really test my faith in my own love for all of humanity. Anyway, Cecil John Rhodes. In 1974, Roger Summers estimated that there were 20,000 of these stone ruins. And by then you start going, okay, hold on, this just does not compute. No people, 20,000 stone ruins, what the hell is going on? And then I got involved in 2007. Within 6 months, I walked through at least 1,000 ruins myself. Me, on my own, walked through 1,000 ruins. So I thought, hold on, 4,000? No. 20,000? Maybe. And I estimated about 100,000. So I thought, I was busy writing Temples of the African Gods at that stage. And I thought, I can't just put that number in there. I've got to figure out, be more scientific about it. So the first thing I did, I phoned up the retired head of archaeology at Wits University, my old university, the best university in South Africa. And I phoned up Revel Mason, and I said to him, I got him on the phone. He answered immediately, interestingly enough. And I said, Revel, hi, this is Michael Tillinger. I just want to know what your take is on these stone ruins. How many do you think they are? And he didn't even hesitate. I must tell you, this blew my mind. He just went off the bat. He went, at least 100,000. And I got really excited because at that stage I was estimating 100,000 ruins. And I got so excited. I said, Revel, this is great news, because I also think that there are about 100,000. But you realize what this does, because at that stage I was still thinking that these were dwellings and cattle kraal and stuff like that. And I said to him, but you realize that this is a problem for us, because if there are 100,000 ruins, and we allocate 10 people per ruin, that means we're dealing with a population of 1 million people. And there was a silence on the phone, and he said, well, then there can't be 100,000 ruins. Just like that. He just changed his mind. Because he went straight into the box of, academic dogma. History books tell us this was a sparsely populated part of the world. Nobody lived here, so there can't be 1 million people living here. The ruins are there, but there were no people. Nobody built it. They just manifested. Ooh, I wonder if that's possibly true. So I started counting these stone ruins. I used Google and all the satellite pictures that Jan Heine had given me that I was looking at, and I got averages and how many per 100 square meters and 1,000 square meters and a hectare, and I realized this thing is a lot bigger than I ever imagined. It went all over South Africa and into Botswana and Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and this is south of Johannesburg, by the way. There are thousands of ruins just south of Johannesburg, and nothing's been done about it. They're just being completely ignored. And this is other side of Rustenburg, where I grew up the last few years of my life. I don't even know what this is. It's so dense, it's insane. It goes on like, it's just about 5 by 5 kilometers. It's this density. There weren't enough people. They did an archaeological dig here in the mid-90s. They sent they sent a really nice archaeologist from Pretoria University and some students to the site, and they spent a week there getting drunk, which is what they do at these digs. I know because Louise, my girlfriend Louise, studied archaeology, and that's exactly what happens. The students go on these digs with one professor who drinks for a week. The students run wild. They take measurements and samples and stuff, and after a week, they get all the stuff together. He writes a report based on what the students did, and that becomes the official archaeological report. I'm not kidding you. This is the standard way of doing archaeological assessments. And that's just shocking. So that archaeological report says that they found evidence of Sothotswana mud hut foundations and walls in some of the circles. So this must have all been built by the Sothotswana people. And this is the kind of logic they use. It's just insane. You know, it's like saying if you find a Barbie doll in the Amsterdam station, this must be where they make Barbie dolls. It's that kind of logic, you know? And it's just, this truly, I must say, boggles my mind. Anyway, by the time I finished counting, I realized there were more than 10 million of these ruins. Not just a few thousand, more than 10 million. And, you know, when you see this number, I went back and I did it like 10 times. I kept thinking I was making a mistake. No. More than 10 million of these ruins. And at that moment, it hits you like a ton of bricks that you're facing a vanished civilization that we know absolutely nothing about. And no history book has ever touched it. No one has ever spoken about them until now. The big question is, what happened to these 10 million ruins? Where are the people? If there are more than 10 million ruins, there must have been millions of people that lived there. Where are the bones? Where's the evidence? What happened to this vanished civilization? I'll tell you after the break. Let's have a...
Daar straks nog een beetje van vertellen. Het gaat door tot, dus ongeveer de bedtijd is. Ja, 10:30, toch? Wat het idee. We gaan 10:30.
If we don't carry on now, I'm going to get horribly drunk and I won't be able to tell you the rest of the story. So, okay. I just wanted to share this with you because I'm probably not going to tell you later, but one of the interesting stories we find in the Sumerian texts is about the Anunnaki making wine and beer. And when I first started exploring these stone circles, one of my connections at Pretoria University said to me, look for little grape-like plants. They're much smaller than grapes, but they look just like grapes. Those are the primordial grapes that all grapes come from. And guess what? I found them. It's not in my presentation because it's just too much. But it's amazing. I found the grapes growing around out of the stone circles. I took the pictures and I didn't know that I had the picture until we got home. And I was looking at the photograph. I said, oh my God, that's the grape that my friend told me about. So I sent it to him. He was furious. He said, I've been looking for this for 30 years. You go out for one day, you find it. So cheers. Okay, so the question was, millions of people, millions of stone ruins, what happened to them? A picture tells 1,000 words. Now, in this photograph, you see what happened to them. But why did this happen? In the Sumerian texts, we find two very important tablets. These are known as king's lists. They're of several king's lists. These two are two of several king's lists that have been found. But these two are really important because they tell us exactly the same story of these 8 kings that ruled the world for more than 220,000 years. Now, this is spectacular. So it clearly tells us that whoever these 8 kings were not human. And it points us in a very interesting direction. But what's even more important is the actual information of these on these two kings lists. And there can be no doubt about the information on this. These have been read and translated by many translators, not just Zacharias Sitchin, but many other scholars that can do these translations. What I find interesting, don't worry about the content, because that's not really what I'm trying to point out to you here. But that opening line and the ending line. After the kingship descended from heaven. And we find that this is a common theme in most of the translations, especially that you find in Sitchin's work. After the kingship descended from heaven. After the gods created the first kings and appointed the first kings from among humanity. So we find out that kingships and kings were appointed by the gods when kingship descended from heaven to earth. And the kings were appointed by the gods to rule over humanity. And to do that, they were given fierce weapons and information and knowledge and the knowledge of alchemy and other weird things that they were able to do that scared the living daylights out of the people and made them obedient to these first kings. And then it tells us this information, and then it says, and then the flood swept over. So we have a very specific reference to the great flood, what I believe is the flood in the Bible, that tells us that after 220,000 years of rule over humanity, the flood came. And that's really interesting, because if you start analyzing the timelines here, it is consistent with what we believe to be the ancient flood, connected to the origins of humankind, between 250,000 and 300,000 years ago, according to the mitochondrial Eve study. And everything still remains consistent. Nothing is out of place. And then the flood swept over. And I think these pictures tell us that because 90% of the stone ruins are actually still covered by soil and by sand, not just soil, but by sea sand. In the Barberton Valley, below Adams Calendar, there's many places, 15 meters of sea sand, sediment, that you drive through. And this is obvious that huge amounts of seawater or ocean came through there at some stage. We just recently, I picked up a seashell in one of the ruins on top of the big ruin in Watervalboven. Inside the ruin, a seashell. And farmers have told me that they've been finding fossilized fish and seashells in their ruins on their farms. And I now found my own seashell in one of the ruins. And that's really exciting. So I believe that the so-called Great Flood that the Bible talks about and all ancient cultures talk about, the flood, is what caused the destruction of this vanished civilization, or of the civilization that caused them to become vanished and covered by soil. And that's anywhere between 12,000 and 15,000, or you make up, your mind which historical book or archaeological evaluation you believe. What kind of stones are we dealing with here? And this is where it all starts to point us in a very interesting direction. It's a special kind of stone known as hornfels. It's a black stone. It looks like this. It's black on the inside. And then on the outside, it's got this reddish-brown skin that grows very, very slowly. A few thousand years per microscopic layer. That's how long it takes for this patina to grow. So if you've got tools or artifacts made out of this black rock, and the tools and artifacts are covered in patina, then you have to assume or conclude that the tools and artifacts were made a long, long time ago, not just a few hundred or a few thousand years ago, because that's not how the patina grows. So the patina in this is a very important way for us to not evaluate exactly or date the stones, the tools, but to give us an idea of how old they are. And we know that based on that, they're very, very old. The other important thing is that the stones ring like bells, and it was really at the moment that I discovered that these stones have acoustic properties and they ring like bells that everything changed. I no longer looked at the stone circles as cattle kraal or dwellings. I suddenly realized that we're dealing with sound. What we started with, sound, the primordial source of all things, infinite energy, what Nikola Tesla probably used, sound that levitates, and now we got sound coming out of the stone walls, of the stone circles. That's a great breakthrough. And that's what drove me in a direction to think of sound as being inextricably connected to the stone circles. So this is just a little example of how some of the stones ring like bells. It takes a while to start. Let me also just show you how some of these other stones ring like bells. This is what I call, and as you can see, we find many, many of these elongated stones. This one is full of patina. It's thick patina, so it's quite dull, but you can still hear the effect. And this is a beautiful one. This one actually rings at 2 different frequencies. Dun dun dun, dun dun dun. They're quite large. Look at this. Look at this one. And it looks also like it was inserted into something up to that point. And also, remember, they all ring like bells. This one is no exception. Alright, and on that note, there we go. That's better. That's what you want. You realize that this thing really rings like a bell, and it reverberates for quite a long time. And there you go. Demonstration how these stones ring like bells, and they were used in all kinds of ways and fashions, just like the Ankh, to create specific vibrational frequencies and specific notes to use as a form and a source of energy. And so suddenly Hello? I started looking more into sound and realized that these elongated stones were probably used in some way to kickstart these stone circles and so forth, but there's a lot more information on this. I don't want to even mention it because then I can't justify it tonight. What are we dealing with here? What are the stones made of? They're made of silica, people. Silica. Most of the content of these stones, what are they made of? 90% of most of the stone on this planet is made of silica. Sandstone is virtually pure silica. So here we have advanced technology used in ancient sites. The most advanced technology today is all silicon-based technology. All the stuff we use here is all silicon-based technology. And you start to realize that these ancient stone structures, whether it's the Great Pyramid or Stonehenge or Adam's Calendar or any of these ancient sites, it's all to do with using silica as some sort of a conductor or a storage of information or conducting energy or creating something else. And And these ancient sites are probably like giant memory banks, and you'll find some 12-year-old kid with an iPhone is going to walk up to one of the stones in Stonehenge and plug his iPhone into it and download millions of years of information. Because these stones, silica has memory. It contains knowledge. It contains information. It conducts sound and light. It stores light and sound and information and stores energy. In Southampton University, they're experimenting now with tiny little crystals that store up to 350 terabytes of information. One tiny little thing. But I can tell you that crystals like that will actually store infinite amount of information. And guess what? So does water. Many of you will be aware of this. And you start seeing the connection between silica and water and the ancient sites. And you realize, wow, these guys knew all the stuff. They knew what they were doing when they built these sites. Other important thing is that these structures are not just memory banks, they're actually giant machines. Giant machines that are activated by light and by sound. This is why they're aligned to the solstices and equinoxes, the movement of the sun, because on the winter solstice, the light comes in there, it activates the silica, just like you do with the hit of your button, of the push of a button. There's a transfer of light and information inside your computer, and it activates a chain reaction. Well, these guys used the sun, the rays of the sun at a specific time of the year to activate the machine and to make it do a certain thing. When the sun comes up there, it does something else. When it comes up there, it does something else. And this is why they aligned. These are huge machines that did something, and they were integrated into activity on planet Earth. So where's the flagship in South Africa among these ruins? No doubt it's Adam's calendar. It was discovered in 2003 by accident by Johann Heine. And when he started showing people this, shortly after that, he first found it and he started measuring it and he realized that it was a calendar. And he tried to share it with the academics at the universities, and he was just bluntly ignored until I came along, and then he gave me the information and I took it from there. What's important to know is that this is not unknown by the ancient African knowledge keepers. And people like Baba Credo Mutwa, one of the preeminent shaman, you can see my book Adam's Calendar here. And just shortly after I wrote Adam's Calendar, Credo asked to see me through a friend of mine. So I went to see him, and when I showed him the book, he started to cry. He said he never thought he would see that special place again in his life. And he told me he was initiated there in 1937 as a young shaman. And it is one of the most special places in human history on earth. It is where humanity was created by the gods. That's what he told me. And guess which god created humanity at Inzalo, Yilanga, or birthplace of the sun? Guess which god in African culture did this thing? Enki. And we have an instant connection between Sumerian texts and ancient African knowledge keeping. And then I started hearing this from many other African knowledge keepers, and not just Credo Mutwa, that it's Enki, or known as Enkai in African history, that was the creator of the human race. And this is where the deed took place, at Adam's Calendar, where this first ceremony or event or whatever took place, where the Anunnaki females were impregnated with the fertilized eggs of this new species to bring forth this new creature, the Lulu Amelu. It's a great story for a Hollywood script. This is what Adam's Calendar looks like from the air. This is north, this is south. North-south goes right between the two calendar stones. This is all the original work done by Johann Heine. It was spectacular work. He saw it from this angle, flying past it, and he looked down and he went, that's not just some ordinary rock formation. Thank God for Johann for that day, because otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you about this. And notice these stones on the side here. That's your Horus stone, and those three stones there are the Orion's belt stones that align with Orion's belt. And there's your stone man, used to stand up there. He was removed in 1992. And the two main calendar stones in the middle. See those as two vibrating plates, because that's really what they are. This is a 3D reconstruction, south, right between the two calendar stones, north. There's your stone man, right across the calendar, vibrating plates. There's your Horus bird and the 3 stones of Orion, all lining up. That one, obviously, Horus always lines up with the rise of the sun, just like in Egypt. Brings in the sunrise, and the 3 stones of Orion line up with these 2 very interesting little peaks there that I'll talk more about. How old are these ruins? I mentioned already that we use patina, but before we get there were 2 independent astronomers that looked at the star alignments, and they came up with these 2 numbers. This is why when I first published Adam's calendar, this was the first bit of information. We said 75,000 years ago, but that's not accurate. The next astronomer said 160,000 years, but that's not accurate either. And it's actually a lot older. The patina growth tells us how old some of these ruins are. You can see this here, this had a tip there that broke off. There's 2 millimeters of patina growth there. This tells us that even the stone ruins, not just Adam's calendar, is extremely old. For this amount of patina to grow on a break that looks like that, will take hundreds of thousands of years, not just a few thousand years. But the archaeoastronomy is really the most exciting. This is an aerial Google shot, as you can see. You can write down, oh no, it's not here. But you'll find it easily. You can see can you see the circular structure? Can you see it? It's originally a circular structure, but when you're on the ground, you don't realize that it's a circular structure. When you're walking there, you don't really get the sense that it was a circular. So there's south, there's north, there are the 2 central stones, and then there's your east alignment across there. But you can see that it's not sitting at 12 o'clock. It's sitting at like close to 11 o'clock, and it's not sitting there. So something is wrong here. It doesn't make any sense. When we measured it, we found there was a 3 degrees, 17 minutes, and 42 second misalignment from true north-south. We're not dealing with magnetic north here, people. Magnetic north wanders all the time. This is true north, the axis mundi of planet Earth. So this blew my mind, and for about 2 years I got caught up thinking that it's got something to do with the wobble of the Earth, the precession of the equinoxes, and I was trying to figure out how old it is, and it's just like down the wrong rabbit hole, really. And I realized, hold on, it doesn't matter where the precession of the equinoxes is. True north remains north. It moves with it. So what we're dealing here is something completely different. And I think it's probably closer to what Charles Hapgood was studying, which he called the crustal displacement or the crustal shift, where the whole crust of the Earth moves every few 100,000 years from where it was before, probably taking the Earth's north-south pole with it. So what I'm really telling you here is that Adam's calendar was constructed at a time where true north and south was different from where it is today. That cannot be argued. And if you say, oh, they just made a mistake, you'd be wrong. These guys didn't make mistakes. We're the ones that make mistakes and misunderstand what they were doing. So this tells us it's very old, but we don't know how old it is. So this takes us to the pyramids. This is one of the early photographs taken of Johann when he first found it. And he was measuring it early in the morning. You can see the sun is from behind, and there you can see beautiful, perfect pyramidal structures that we've been ignoring for so long. And there's a third one, a little one right there. You can hardly see it. I'm not sure what's going on there because they look like bedrock. It's possibly that they were carved out of the solid bedrock and they're now completely covered by soil. Remember that there's at least 15 meters of sediment, of sea sand. At least 15 meters. And there's other stuff going on, so they're covered by trees and stuff growing on them. But how can we find out if they are truly possibly pyramids or connected to Adam's calendar? Well, the ancients used sacred geometry for everything. We now know this. So I drew a golden mean spiral between Adam's calendar, or from Adam's calendar, and guess where it ends? Right between the pyramids. Adam's calendar. And you realize that The argument of probability can be used here. What is the probability that this is an accident? It's several million to one, so it must be connected. And that there's a reason why these are here in that distance exactly from Adam's calendar. The other interesting thing is that when you connect Adam's calendar to Great Zimbabwe, it ends right in the Great Pyramid of Giza, all along the 31 degrees east longitudinal line. And it just so happens that the numeric value for the word Elohim or Anunnaki is 31. And the plot just thickens. It just gets better. The further down this road you go, the more you look at these connections and these coincidences, the more spectacular they become. Right? And then I found this translation in one of Zechariah Sitchin's books. Remember, he didn't know about Adam's calendar. He had no idea when he wrote this translation. And this is what it says. 40 Shar, after arriving on earth, Enki built a special place of observing in the deep Abzu on the edge of a cliff, aligned with his abode in the north and the peaks. It's like describing the place exactly. The only thing is interesting is that I believe that Adam's calendar is a lot older than the pyramids in Giza. So I think when he's talking about the peaks, he's probably talking about the pyramids and not the peaks here. But what we can do is when we take 40 Shar and we do the calculation, 1 Shar being 3,600 years according to Sitchin, we multiply that and we subtract that number from 435,000 years, which is what Sitchin says when the Anunnaki arrived on earth. This is what you get, 285,000 years ago. This is when Adam's calendar was built according to that translation. And this gets really interesting because if humanity did have a connection to being created at Adam's calendar, that is still in sync with the mitochondrial Eve study of the appearance of the human race on planet Earth. Nothing is out of sync yet. So let's get back to the stone circles. What were these stone circles for? I think you start seeing what these patterns are all about. This is the cymatic pattern for the shape of the sound ah on a metal plate will make this beautiful sound. And you realize as you start looking, we're dealing with sound. The stones that the stone circles are made up of are resonate sound, and you realize that each one of these stone circles is just a cymatic pattern of the sound of planet Earth at that specific point. This is a representation of the sound frequency right there. So each one of these is a plug point, an energetic plug point into Mother Earth, becoming an energy generating source and multiplying that frequency and that energy. How much does it multiply it? I have to first explain to you this little device here in modern electronics known as a magnetron. These magnetrons are in laser beams, like this little laser beam here. Okay? Some of these are benign, they don't hurt you, and some laser beams can cut metal in a split second. This is how powerful magnetrons are. And if a little magnetron in your microwave or a laser beam can create so much energy, I met a scientist in Glastonbury in last year, 2013. He told me they built a magnetron and they were testing it in their lab. And from what he explained to me, it was about this size. The magnetron, they switched it on and they got such a fright, they couldn't switch it off quickly enough because it started melting everything in the lab. It melted the whole metal stand and everything. They switched it on for like 2 seconds and off, and everything was destroyed. That's how powerful magnetrons are, people. You got to start setting your mind free here. Imagine if a little magnetron can create so much energy. How much a magnetron 20 meters in diameter will create, made of virtually pure silica. An insane amount of energy. In fact, I have it from a Dutch psychic that came on tour with me, who didn't speak English, spoke very bad English. And the feedback that I got from her was that one of these would create more energy than all the power plants on Earth today. And quite frankly, I believe that. because if you know what these magnetron things do, that's insane. And guess what? There are thousands of these magnetrons in southern Africa. Thousands. So now you can start imagining how much energy they were creating, and a huge energy grid that covered large parts of southern Africa, all for the mining of gold and whatever else they were doing with it, converting it into monoatomic gold and doing other things. That's still the exciting journey of discovery. And the interesting thing is that this energy grid is still alive. It still gives us insane amounts of energy because we've measured it. We've measured electromagnetic waves, the sound frequencies that come out of them, the loudness of these sound frequencies, and also this thing called heat signature. The heat signature is the average temperature of 200 meters below the ground, not the temperature on the ground. It's the sort of average 200 meters below the ground. So the heat signature tells us that at 80 degrees, if you measured the heat signature 80 degrees, it'll tell you that you're standing on top of a volcano. So just keep that in mind. Okay, 80 degrees heat signature equals volcano. Okay, so now let's go to this here. So this here we measured sound frequencies coming out of these walls here of 33.5 gigahertz. Now, you're not supposed to measure sound in gigahertz in the air around us, because it's not supposed to travel in gigahertz. And yet, this is what we're measuring, coming out of the walls. So what's happening here is that we're picking up resonance of the silica inside the walls. That is, the potential of it, we're picking up a sound, but then the air around us can't handle it. It becomes hypersound. As it leaves these stone walls, it somehow changes and does something else that we're only starting to understand now. But we're measuring 33.5 gigahertz of sound coming out of those walls, very high decibels, 580 megahertz activity of electromagnetic waves running horizontally, running horizontally here. That's why you can't pick up satellite reception. You can't pick up your GPS signal. In fact, I forgot to tell you that at Adam's calendar, that's one of the tricks we play on the people as well. Bring your GPS and see if it works inside here. And it's just great when you see these macho guys, you know, they got the biggest car, the latest GPS, they're ready for the world. And they walk in there with a GPS, and I say, have you got a GPS? Yeah, of course. It's the best GPS. It's the latest GPS. Well, do you think it'll work in here? Of course it'll work in here. Bring it. Oh, as they walk, literally, it's like from here to there, and it stops. It just goes, starts to go crazy. And it's just amazing what happens to these people. Their ego goes from up there right down into their shoes. I just bought this yesterday, man. There's something wrong with it, eh? It's great. It's a real equalizer, man. And it just doesn't work. The electromagnetic fields are so powerful that it shuts the communication down. We did a whole weekend of ground penetrating radar at this ruin here, at 2 other ruins, and at Adam's calendar, all for nothing. Because the poor GPS company, and this is the largest ground penetrating radar company from the United States in their South African office, that offered us their services. And after 2 months or 3 months, eventually they phoned me up and said, listen, we don't know what happened. We're so embarrassed, we can't explain it. It's our data and information is just scrambled. It's just junk. We can't give you any intelligent feedback. And I said, don't worry about it. You just gave me the most intelligent feedback you could possibly give me, because their GPS measurements were scrambled every step of the way that we are doing GPR analysis, because the GPR happens, you make grid lines like 1 meter apart that way, because that's the one we measured here in there, and then that way, and you measure the GPS measurement here, and you step there, you measure the GPS there, and then you do a grid. So it's exactly from GPS that you then see what happens underground. The entire GPS thing got scrambled, so they couldn't give us any information. And that was the best news I could get, because while we were doing the GPR measurements, I kept looking at the 2 guys, and I was dragging the big orange box around, the with a radar in it, and I kept looking at the guy with a GPS thing on his back, a big satellite dish in his backpack, and he kept getting measurements, and I kept looking at him going, "Are you getting GPS signal in here?" And he said, "Yeah, I've got 15 satellites, man, look." And I thought, okay, well, that's it. There's my theory gone. No, all garbage, all scrambled. So when I tell you that we made these measurements, we're probably underestimating what's going on there. Okay, then we got to Adam's calendar, and I call it Enki's calendar here. Don't get confused, it's the same place. Okay. As you enter, this is the circle that you see from space. That's the circle. We park the cars here, and then we walk up here. As you walk into this imaginary circle, it's 9.5 degrees. The heat signature is 9.5 degrees. As you walk into that circle, there's no circle. It's an imaginary circle. It shoots to 77 degrees. It's like literally 9.5 degrees, 77 degrees. What the hell's going on? Something strange is going on that we don't understand. Between these two calendar stones, it goes up to beyond 80 degrees. Now the measurement is telling you that you're standing on top of a volcano. And yet it's just bedrock, it's just sandstone, standing on sandstone. And then we measured the sound frequencies, nothing, just ambient noise. As you go through this imaginary circle, it goes berserk. It goes beyond 375 gigahertz of sound that we're measuring. Why? I don't know, but that's what it is we're measuring. This, as far as I know, this kind of sound frequencies have never ever been measured anywhere on planet Earth that we know of. It's probably like secret military projects that use those frequencies. And then the electromagnetic waves. Again, nothing outside. As you turn the device inside, there you got your... the first time we measured it was 1700 megahertz activity running horizontally, preventing you from picking up your GPS. And then the magic happens. Between the two calendar stones, it goes even higher. We've actually measured it much higher than this lately, except the difference is that between the stones in the middle, it spirals up into the sky. It's not horizontal. And that is just spectacular. So what the hell are we dealing with here? What's going on here? And I think that we found ourselves one of these. Activated by energies and forces that we don't really understand. And what is it for? Apparently the Anunnaki were obsessed with gold. Apparently they mined a lot of the gold. The information seems to be pointing in that direction. And according to the Sumerian text and Sitchin's translations, they were taking the gold off this planet. It's not on this planet. I mean, you know, Germany is looking for their gold. They're not finding their gold, right? Everyone's looking for their gold, but there's no gold. Fort Knox is supposed to be full of gold. There's no gold in Fort Knox. So the gold is not here. It's off this planet. How did they get it off this planet? Possibly with places like this. And just beam up the gold, Scotty. Where do you want it? Over there? Good. Zzz, zzz, gone. Thank you. Next. And, you know, let your minds run free, because we're dealing with technology and knowledge of the laws of nature that we're only coming face to face with that kind of thinking, moving into multidimensional physics and thinking beyond the box of Newtonian physics. And then it brings us to the sacred stones. There are thousands of these stones that you find. And until recently, they were called weights for digging sticks. The ancient people made this so they had weights to go and put it around their stick. So when they went to dig for food in the veld, they could dig more efficiently because they had a weight. Well, I think it's like anyone who came up with that is either brain damaged or seriously disturbed, because, you know, I can find many other ways to put a weight around my digging stick than spending a lifetime making one of these. Once again, it's a complete misunderstanding or misinterpretation by archaeologists or historians by observing the application or the use of tools by indigenous peoples. Yes, the people of recent times found these stones and they thought, wow, what a great thing. And they used it around a digging stick as a weight. So yes, you would have seen people using them as weights for their digging stick, but they weren't the one that made these stones. Daniel Nunes in New York City makes these little vortex coils out of copper wire. And by putting in sound into the center of it, he turns gas into plasma. That's how much energy his little coils generate. Sound activates the coil and turns gas into plasma. Just keep that. And that's a puny little copper wire coil like that. Imagine how much energy a donut-shaped vortex coil made out of pure silica will create. This is what these ancient stones or the sacred stones are. They're vortex field energy generators. You put sound frequency into the middle and it creates a huge, expanding, probably scalar, if you can call it that, fields of energy that we're only starting to understand now. And the reason I say this is because I know we measured the energies around these stones, so I knew they were very powerful, but I never realized how powerful they are until we caught a flight to Hawaii to go and deliver the stone to Nassim Haramein so that he can do some research with it at the Resonance Institute in Hawaii. And on the way to America, Louise and I got on the aeroplane and we flew to Doha. And I put the stone in my bag and I forgot about it, and we got off at Doha and had a layover for a few hours. Then we got on the plane again to Chicago, at which point my bag went through Homeland Security scanning. And we're sitting on the plane, and next thing I hear, Louise Clark, please identify yourself. But this is after the captain, you hear them say, okay, close doors, cross-check, and blah, blah, blah. And so we think, okay, we're taking off. 15 minutes, nothing, we're just sitting there. And eventually we hear, Louise Clark, please identify yourself. So I look at Louise and I go, what have you done? It's like literally I thought, okay, my God, they found some, dope seeds in her bag or something because, some friend borrowed her bag, obviously. But I don't know what, she's going to land up in some Turkish prison for the next 15 years. And, Midnight Express, here we come. And I thought, I'm not letting... And so the air hostess comes running along, and she says, please follow me. You must get off the plane. And I thought, what? And I get up and I go with Louise, and they march her off the plane onto the tarmac, and there's my bag with 5 guys with guns around my bag. And I'm going, what? That's my bag. That's not Louise's bag. And then as I saw it's my bag, I went, oh my God, it's the stone. My stone is in my bag. So I go down and I say, it's my bag. So Louise goes back and she's standing in the door. And in the meantime, the captain comes out and the captain says to her, if this plane isn't in the air in the next 2 minutes, I'm offloading the whole plane. So there's chaos everywhere. And I'm sitting there with my bag, with these guys with guns, very nervous. And they say, there's a security threat in your bag. Please, sir, open your bag. So I'm thinking, oh, it's the stone. And I can't tell them it's like ancient artifacts, because then, they'll confiscate it. So what am I going to tell them? So I'm thinking, African curios. Yeah, anything can be African curios, man. That's it. And that's exactly how it is. Anything can be African curios, right? So I'm opening the bag, and the guys are nervous, and eventually open it. I get the stone out. It's wrapped in bubble. It looked like, when you see these movies with the drug dealers and they take out the drugs out of their bags. It's exactly what I felt like when I took this out. Like I held this big thing in my hands wrapped in bubble wrap, and they're looking at me. And eventually I opened it up, and this bloody stone pops out. And they looked at this. They're just very confused. And I said, African curios for my friend in Hawaii. And there's one African guy there. He looks at it. He says, oh, I know those. I've seen those. And he turns around and he starts walking away. So the other guys obviously, okay, good. Well put. In the meantime, the captain is freaking out. Get back on the plane and put it all back. Put it all back and on the plane. And I go sit down, and Louise sits down and I say to her, so, what's going on? And she says, you know what the captain told me? She says that When he came out of the cockpit and he stood next to me, the first thing he said, whatever is in that bag crashed the NSA security system. I'm not kidding you. That's why they stopped the plane. The stone works. It doesn't just work, it is an incredible, advanced piece of technology that we only going to start to understand as the time goes by. You put sound frequency in there, it creates an electromagnetic pulse, and that's probably what happened. As they scanned my bag, one of the frequencies that go through must have gone straight into the middle. Remember the movie Ocean's 11? Remember Ocean's 11? How did they put out the lights in Las Vegas? Electromagnetic pulse. That's it. That's, I think, what happened here. So now we know that the stone works, the sound frequencies are real, that the electromagnetic fields in the stone circles are off the charts, the sound frequencies are never measured before. We're dealing with advanced knowledge of the laws of nature and an active energy grid that still works today. It still works. It still gives us free energy every second of every day. We just need to figure out how to use it. So what are all these channels for? The channels between the stone circles. I believe they were for levitation and transport. Like maglev train tracks. Trains that run on magnetic levitation tracks. Exactly the same thing. And if you don't quite know how that works, have a look at this little video clip.
So what if we got here?
So we have quantum locking. The superconductor is locked in space and it stays wherever I put it. You see, this is quantum trapping.
That's amazing.
As long as it's
so the
cold,
it's superconducting. It's frozen with liquid nitrogen.
Upside down.
Right.
And it stays locked.
So the fact that it's superconducting is locking the magnetic field in 3 dimensions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that pivots.
You see, because this is symmetric, it can rotate without break the locking. The locking doesn't break.
Right.
Because
it stays there on the X and Y, but not on, it pivots on the...
Yeah, on the axis of the magnets. You see, if I can move it on the side, it will again pivot around the axis of the magnet, because it makes sure that the magnetic field inside of it stays the same.
Right. It's astonishing. Can you put it on the track for us?
Yeah. I just levitate it above the track quite high, and I can just rotate it.
So it's actually floating above the surface.
Yeah, it's not floating, it's locked above the surface.
So you could tilt it at an angle and it would still fly around.
Yeah, like this, and it will just go around like this. I can just go and put it at different height, and then like this.
And lock it at the height.
Lock it, yeah, different height, different configuration.
Right.
And I can even lock it at opposite way. If you could just hold for a minute. High. I'm doing the same thing. I'm locking it upside down, and then it is suspended.
Fantastic. Okay.
So imagine those channels acting as these little levitation tracks that they could move things around or do whatever they wanted with that. But that brings me to the Earth grid, because it seems that all these ancient sites on Earth, Adam's Calendar, the Great Pyramids, Pumapunku, they all seem to be built on these nodal points, these energy points that have, there's Adam's Calendar right there, there's Giza, and you can find, if you follow this, and this is a Russian map that actually shows you, and they call it the crystal grid, and this is really interesting, because there seems to be some sort of an energetic code encoded into planet Earth that's mirrored from the sky. And why do we know it's mirrored from the sky? Because the Sumerian texts tell us. And this is not a Zechariah Sitchin translation, by the way. This comes from the Shoyan collection. And this is what it says. In the distant days, in those days after destinies had been decreed, after An, who was Anu, and Enlil, his son, had set up the regulations for heaven and earth. That's interesting. Regulations for heaven and earth. Enki, the exalted knowing God, by the rules for heaven and earth, the fixed rules, he set up the cities. So they're suggesting that there's a grid of energetic rules in the sky that is mirrored on earth, and they set up the cities on earth mimicking or mirroring this energy grid in the sky. What the hell's going on here? So this points us in what David Wilcock first actually discovered this when he started talking about these military emblems and these bands that are encoded. This information is encoded into these emblems. They call it the rules. Remember? The rules. The fixed rules for heaven and earth. And here we have. The military calls these bands around the earth the rules. They don't know where they come from, but they've always been there. Some sort of an energetic grid around planet Earth. And then they put these delta-shaped things here, and people say, oh, these are just delta-shaped craft. No, that's just one arm out of a pentagon or a pentagram. That's what it is, connecting us to understanding of sacred geometry and so forth. This is deeply encoded stuff, people. But again, just go away and think about what I'm saying here to you. So the fixed rules, the energy grid around the earth is actually encoded in the modern military emblems, all of them. And that takes us to these ancient cities around the world and these ancient sites all over the world, starting with Egypt, like Karnak and so forth. And it's just spectacular when you look at it. And then you see these giant obelisks that have mesmerized modern scientists and modern tourists. There's an obelisk, a tip of an obelisk lying there. Okay, this is the one. I stood on the one side, on that side, and Hugh Newman tapped on this side. Guess what I found out? It rings like a bell. It's spectacular. It's like dong. I try to record it with my little recorder, but it doesn't do it justice. You know, you hear this ding, when you put your ear there and you go, I couldn't believe my ears. And then you realize that in these ancient sites, there are just too many pillars and not enough space. And we go as tourists and we're so overwhelmed by this. Wow, this is amazing. And then they tell you, oh, this is for the worshipping and this goddess, and this is where they worship this, and they made the worshipping here, and they donated food and blood and sacrifice over there, and this is what they did, and there's all these gods, and it's just all made up bull. It's all lies. They make it up because they don't have anything else to tell you. So these stories are all made up. But what you find, and there's that obelisk, too many pillars, not enough space. Okay? When you see from the air, look at this. It's just ridiculous. Oh, there were more pillars here, but they're gone. And then these weird symmetrical shapes here that make no sense. Many of them have no doors and entrances, incidentally. Same thing as there. And there's another weird thing there. And you realize that even at what's this place called? The Parthenon in Greece, there are the remains of the foundations of a much bigger geometric grid around the central thing here. And this entrance portal with pillars in it that doesn't make any sense. Just too many pillars. Why are all these pillars in the way? There are more of these. Looks just like the Parthenon. Look, right next to, these temples, you worship and come make offerings to the gods here. And then this is where the people used to live. And this is what they call the dwellings of the people. And then you find this, and you go, what? These concentric circles in front of long pillars, and then this big open place, another big open thing in there. And you start to go, hold on, what's going on here? What are these stones all made of? These stones are all made of silica. And we realize that these are actually templates, not for temples for worshipping, but giant circuit boards that were generating energy and either putting it into the sky or sucking it out of the sky to do something weird. I mean, this is the one that really got my attention. And you realize that we've completely misunderstood what these ancient sites were all about. They were just giant energy-generating devices. And we're so bloody ignorant that we just believe anything people tell us. You realize that these are just minor versions of those. That is not a dwelling area for people. That's the circuit board. That's part of the circuit board. And water and silica are the two most abundant elements on Earth, actually. Water and silica. So guess what? They use silica and also water in many of these ancient sites. And even the Mayas, the encoded guy lying on his back is actually just a circuit board that's been anthropomorphized to make it look, hide the hidden meaning behind it. But when you study this, you realize that that's what we're dealing with. And the Great Pyramids, same thing, Look, 1, 2, 3. This is great. I love this one. These are giant energy generating devices, giant machines that are activated by light and sound. And they're all to keep this energy grid up in the sky, the rules of heaven and earth. That's what I believe these were doing. So I have these big obelisks and these things somehow to keep this energy grid around planet Earth, to keep us, humanity, enslaved. And I believe it's this energy grid that was created either by the Anunnaki or somebody else before them, that was kept in place to keep us enslaved and keep us out of sight and out of mind of other intelligent beings out in space, to prevent these other intelligent beings of higher consciousness to see what's happening here. And this is what I believe that white powder of gold that makes things disappear was possibly used for, as a shielding or a cladding device to make us invisible to the rest of other beings, so they can't see what's going on here. So when Zechariah Sitchin says that they ground the gold to the finest powder and suspended it in the heavens to protect their planet against cosmic rays or something like that, he was pretty close, but he misunderstood. It was suspended in heaven, in the heavens around planet Earth, to create this energetic grid, to prevent others from seeing what's going on here and the atrocities that were being committed against humanity. And human sound was the source of the energy. Guess what? There's an amphitheater. They fill the amphitheater full of people. They scared them shitless, or they fill them with fear because God's going to kill them, or something like that. And then they send the sound of the human beings through the connectors to the entrance portal to this giant circuit board. And the portal kicks, the sound of the people kickstarts it, and the circuit board jumps to action. And if you think that that's just one example, there's another amphitheater connected to a giant circuit board. And there's another amphitheater connected to a circuit board on there. And this goes throughout all of human history. We, the people, through our own sound, were the source of the energy that kept these circuit boards active and keeping the energy grid around planet Earth. So what have we learned from this? that we know very little. Yeah. That we know very little, and we have to start reevaluating pretty much everything that we've been taught at school, from physics to history to religion and everything. Because the entire education system is intended to do one thing only, and that's to turn us into slaves to that march to the beat of the drum of the corporations that create a workforce out of those that go to school. Right? So we know that the 2012 event was a real event. It was the crossing of the galactic plane. And what does the crossing of the galactic plane have to do? If you don't know that, this is what happens to our solar system. Every so many thousand years, it crosses the galactic plane, in which all the dense frequencies of the solar system, the galactic core, are amplified in that galactic plane. So when our solar system crosses that galactic plane as it moves, remember our solar system travels through space like this. The sun and the planets, this is how we travel through space. We're not just hurtling through space. So we're going like this, spiraling, just like everything else goes in spirals. So as we cross that galactic plane, something happens. And this is what the Mayans knew. These ancient cultures, not just the Mayans, many other ancient cultures talk about this. They knew that this was going to activate our DNA. That 97% junk DNA is now being kickstarted. This is really the event. That's why it's referred to the New Age and the Age of Enlightenment. And that's what's happening. Millions of people are waking up every day thinking new thoughts, having new ideas that they didn't have the day before. Why? Because our DNA is being activated. It's kick-started, and it's feeding a loop-back mechanism, creating a feedback mechanism. And the more you think, the more you activate it yourself, and hooray, here we go, on the road to enlightenment. But it's not that simple, because we are born on this planet and we're completely ignorant what's going on. We are born free, and yet we cannot move around freely. We can't live where we choose to. We have to follow rules and laws that we did not agree to at birth. I certainly didn't agree to any of the laws or the rules that are imposed on me. And we have to work and pay taxes to survive. We're the only creature on this planet that has to earn money to survive on this planet. I mean, something is wrong with this picture. And you realize that we're enslaved on our own planet. We live on a prison planet. It's really as simple as that. Totally and utterly enslaved on every possible level. And I actually think that this is connected to what many people call enlightenment. What is enlightenment? You ask people, what is enlightenment? And they give you another definition. Oh, it's, getting in touch with yourself. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's, meditating and getting an understanding of the universe and everything in it. Okay, but what does that mean? And so it's like a never-ending description of what enlightenment is. Well, this is what I think enlightenment is really understanding that we're completely and utterly enslaved on every possible level, and I've identified 4 levels. We're enslaved physically because our DNA has been messed with, and we're a synthetically generated beast, okay, a creature. Let's be nice about it. A genetically manipulated creature. We're enslaved mentally because we can't make sense of this, and our pineal gland has been severed, so that's an enslavement. We can't connect to the morphogenetic field that is actually connected to everything in creation. Enslaved mentally. We're enslaved emotionally because our hearts can't deal with it, and we're so confused about it, and we get all emotional about it. And then we're also enslaved spiritually because our souls are prevented to reconnect with Source when they leave our body after this physical thing expires. This energy grid that's been created around planet Earth seems to somehow create a karmic trap that keeps sending our souls back into infinite number of reincarnations until what? Until you reach enlightenment. And you realize that you're enslaved, and then you make your own conscious choice and say, I don't need to go back anymore. This is just a prison planet that has been designed to do just that. And I think that that's something that we need to get through and think about and learn more about it, because there's a lot of weird stuff going on that we really don't understand. How did it get so bad? Remember those Sumerian tablets that tell us when kingdom was lowered to earth from heaven? Well, at that same time, when those kings were appointed by the gods and they started controlling humanity, what did they do? One of the first things they did, this is those Sumerian tablets again, one of the first things those first priest kings did is they created money. Money was maliciously introduced as a tool of enslavement. Money is not part of evolution. That money is not evolved with so-called evolution of the human race. This is one of the examples of the earliest forms of money. It goes back to 2046 BC. The first bankers were the first priest kings as appointed by the gods. The first banks were the temples. What you're looking at here is really one of the oldest bills of exchange, one of the oldest promissory notes, one of the oldest negotiable instruments. And it was issued for 8 shekels of silver as interest, by the way. Fascinating. So we know that the banks run our world. Money, all money is private money from private banks and private central banks. And these are the banking families. If you don't know who they are yet, you better wake up. And they own everything. They control the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization. These are just the obvious stuff, right? And they control all the central banks from this place here. The Bank of International Settlements that dictates the policy to the central banks of the world. And they control our governments. It's that simple. And this is why banks can bail out countries, because they are the institutions that lend money to the countries. Many people are still under the erroneous belief that the governments own the banks. No. And this is why we have a problem. And this is why people like Lincoln, with his greenback, solved the problem virtually overnight, and that's why, guess what? He got a bullet. Exactly 100 years later, JFK did the same thing. He got a bullet. They control our education system, as I mentioned already. It's got nothing to do, our education's got nothing to do with learning skills for life. It's to create a workforce. Money controls the wars. Pretty much all the wars, in all of human history, have been controlled by the money makers. And you will not get away from that. Mayor Amschel Rothschild says, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws." And that's how these things work. They run the legal system through our governments. And I know this because I've been in the South African Supreme Court for more than 3 years against the bankers, and you realize that they control everything. JFK issued the United States note in America. 6 months later, he got a bullet. This is what the United States note looks like. If you think it looks just like the modern note, United States note. The money today says Federal Reserve note. Big difference. This was owned by the people of the United States, not by a private corporation. They didn't like that. Incidentally, that's also what the Second World War was all about, if you're not aware of that yet. Everything else we've been told about the Second World War and what Hitler did, there's a lot of truth to that. But the biggest thing that he was guilty of was to create his own private money for the German people that made Germany the most prosperous country in Europe within 5 years. This was going to infect the whole of Europe, that kind of thinking. The bankers couldn't allow that. So they started a whole thing that we completely misunderstand today. And they used a whole bunch of people as lambs to the slaughter to achieve their purpose. You've got to understand one thing. These guys will go to every length and any length to keep control. And if you don't know that yet, the government and the large corporations have stolen the countries from their people. That's what's happened. And in South Africa, we have a beautiful constitution that starts, "The country belongs to the people and all those who live in it." And then immediately it follows, and it says, it keeps confusing the country of South Africa and the Republic of South Africa. And why do I say that? Because our countries are corporations. They're registered as corporations on the United Securities Exchange, USA Securities Exchange, and they trade our birth certificates, they trade everything that's got an amount on it or any kind of ownership. Here is a printout from the US Securities Exchange. Companies, search results. Companies with names matching South Africa. Anglo-American, Government of the Republic of South Africa is a corporation, company. Lehman Brothers. Here's Standard Bank, by the way. Standard Bank. There's Old Mutual. Old Mutual is the 30th largest corporation in the world. In little South Africa. After Barclays PLC and Deutsche Bank and all that. Old Mutual, 30th largest company in South Africa. That's not from selling insurance to South African homeowners. Definitely not. And here's Republic of South Africa, a corporation. There are a few more examples. There's a lot more in my book, Ubuntu Contributionism. I list the whole list. Every country is registered and operates as a corporation. Money does not make the world go round. Look, it goes around all by itself. Money is the obstacle to all progress, the absolute tool of control. We don't need money. It's not the love of money. Some people say to you, yeah, but it's not the love of money. Money is just a form of exchange. It's a form of energy exchange. And they make all kinds of excuses because deep in their heart, they're just worried what would happen if they don't have money. That's all it is. It's about fear. So they use all these weird excuses. But what I'm going to tell you is that's not the love of money. It's the mere presence of money. The moment you introduce money into the system, it just corrupts everything. It destroys life among humanity. We cannot continue doing the same that we've been doing for the last 6,000 years. That's insanity, and we know that Albert Einstein defined it beautifully, saying that insanity is doing the same experiment over and over again, expecting different results. So after 6,000 years, or whatever it is, surely we must have learned now and become wise. We can't carry on doing the same thing. We have to find a new system. Our system is broken. We cannot fix this problem with the tools that created the problem. And those tools are private money, private banks, central banks. And if we think that some clever ass economists, and we see these wise economists all the time on CNN, all these and these young with a brand new suit, and he says, "I'll tell you how we're going to solve the problem. We're going to," and it's just all bloody nonsense. It's using the same tools to entrap us even more. Just remove the money. If we don't use their money, they cannot enslave us. Very simple. And this is where contributionism and Ubuntu comes in. You saw the little beautiful intro that was shot by Aline in South Africa. So I'm going to cut straight to the chase. Ubuntu contributionism. It's so simple we cannot screw it up because it follows a natural order of things. I've had thousands and thousands of questions over the last 10 years. I started this journey in 2005 at the first dinner that I was invited to come and share the philosophy of contributionism. Strangely, it was a woman that was senior bank. She worked at Absa Bank, which is Barclays in South Africa. And she invited me to a dinner party to tell her friends how a world without money would work. Well, they nearly beat me up. I'm not kidding you. They became so angry with me that I could suggest that we didn't need money. What do people need? We need food, water, love, friendship, homes, tables, chairs, knives, gardens, clothes, technology, healthcare. We need arts and culture and everything we can imagine. We need that, and we should have whatever our minds can come up. We do not need money. That's the one thing that keeps getting between us and the things we want and need. Money does nothing. People do everything. People plant the seeds, grow the food, build the bridges, create the rockets and the free energy devices. Money does nothing. People create the works of art, and people are capable of infinite love. Money cannot do that. The Beatles were right. Contributionism. My 5-point mantra, it's very simple. No money, no barter, no trade, no value attached to anything greater than anything else, because all of our contributions should be equally valuable. That really messes a lot of people up. Just think about that. And if you still think that what you're doing is more valuable than somebody else, you have a serious problem. Deal with it. And the only way we're going to get out of that is by getting rid of money. Money will constantly skew the perception of who the hell we are and what we think we're contributing. And finally, where everybody contributes their God-given talents or their acquired skills for the greatest benefit of all in their community. I'm making it sound simple. It actually is that simple. We just need to get over this bridge, this block that it can't be done. That is not true. How do we get there from here? We start with the first step. And it really is a transformation in small steps. We got to probably in the beginning use money to get rid of money, because that's how the system has been structured. You can't collapse it overnight, so we're going to have to be very clever about it and use the money to do what? To create critical interim steps. First of all, take back the right to print money. Imagine, and this is what the Ubuntu Party is really offering the people in South Africa, and if you're not aware of this yet, my Ubuntu Party is registered to run in the elections on the 7th of May. So we'll be on the ballot. Yeah. And it was really a miracle. I mean, it happened just within hours in Paris. And I found out 24 hours before we had to pay the deposit that the party we were going to go in with, who said they had the money, found out they didn't have the money to pay the deposit to be in the elections. So I had 24 hours to come up with 200,000 rand, which is a lot of money. So I made one phone call, and this one person, who's a wealthy woman, came through. She had the check next morning, bank guaranteed check that we delivered to the IEC. It's a miracle. So at one moment we were going to go under the flag of another party, which I wasn't happy with. The next moment we were in on our own, and we started raising money on Indiegogo, and we've now raised about $32,000, and we can pay for everything to do with the elections. So take back the the right to print money for the people. Take the right back from the central banks, and you will solve pretty much all the problems virtually overnight, people. If you don't understand this, please go away and do some research. Figure out what I'm telling you here. The money for the people, by the people, not by private banks that charge you interest. When you print money for the people, by the people, it's interest-free. It's tax-free. It is available for all public works and anything that the people want and need immediately. There's no deliberating. Well, how much do you earn? No. The money must be made available. It's a tool of the people, not the other way around. And what I believe is that the small towns and villages are actually the core of starting the contributionism philosophy. It can start in the small towns very successfully. And critical community projects, the obvious things, energy, water, food, housing, arts and culture, whatever the community decides they want to get involved in, start using the collective money that you have and creating these critical projects. Because once you have a town that is creating more food than it needs by the people, and then it exports the excess food to their neighboring towns. Once that same community creates building materials and whatever, let your mind run free. Bread, milk, butter, cheese, vegetables, etc. And you make it available for virtually nothing because everybody in the community participates in making this stuff, and you make it available to the communities around you, you've just collapsed the capitalist system. Because they're all going to be coming to you to buy this stuff from you because you're selling it to them at a fraction of the price. So, alternative community education, because we cannot keep educating our children in these prison camps called schools any longer. Take your children out of school, homeschool them, stop poisoning their minds. Use master teachers that are appointed by the community, not by some department of education. The community needs to choose their teachers for the children. I mean, everything in our lives is ass about face. There are no jobs or careers without money. Without money, you're not going to have a job or a career. You're going to do what you love to do. So I call it a labor of love. We wake up in the morning in the community of your choice, not a city or a disgusting slum suburb somewhere because you were trapped there for socioeconomic reasons. You wake up in the town or a village of your choice. You do what you love to do for your community, not only because you want to do it, but because they've accepted you for what it is that you do, and they love you and respect you and reward you for what it is you do for your community because you love doing it for yourself. And this is how everybody contributes. This is the first principle of human nature, is to create, is not to be lazy and sit on your ass and do nothing and let people do stuff for you. No, it's the other way around actually. All we want to do all our lives is create, and all that happens all our lives is we prevent it from doing and creating what we want to create. And create is a big word, okay? Only out of unity comes infinite diversity and abundance. Remember that. This is really the prime directive that I think Star Trek has been talking about. Absolute unity. And within that unity, you can have infinite number of diversities, but it all has to resonate together in harmony. Otherwise, it just causes dissonance, and there's just be a bloody mess. And that's what it's become. We live in a divided world where everything is divided and compartmentalized. It doesn't resonate in harmony. We need to break those walls down of separation and start resonating together and working together as a united force of human beings conscious of what it is that we're doing and where we are going. And that's what this is all about, Ubuntu contributionism, with that little video clip that we started with. All of it is in my new book, Ubuntu Contributionism, a blueprint for human prosperity. That is not a pyramid, an all-seeing eye pyramid, no. It's an equilateral triangle. This is a deeply encoded image here. We send the Illuminati or the New World Order a message by very cleverly constructing this with very positive, energetic messages of harmonic resonance and an understanding of everything in creation, using what Willem de Swart and I have learned from the tarot cards. And this is so deeply encoded that anyone who is trying to play a big shot role in the New World Order, when they see this cover, they will know, oh shit, they know. So we're sending them a message. So if anybody tells you, oh, yeah, look, he's occult and it's all like occult. No. It's our message. It's encoded with positive intention of Ubuntu and contributionism. And to finish off here tonight is, please go away and tell everybody. Don't just keep it to yourself, because that's absolutely no good. Go out there and be a seed of consciousness. Tell the people what you know. Don't be afraid of it. Remember that there are millions and millions of people like you out there that have this knowledge and information, but most of us are so scared to talk about it. Say, what will they think? Are they going to think I'm crazy? Or no, I don't think they're ready to hear this. All these kind of things going through our minds. Screw that. Go out there and tell them what you think and tell them what you know. Be bold about it. If they don't understand it, it's their problem. Don't make it your problem. Make it their problem. And if they don't agree with you, make it their problem. And tell them to go and get some education and do some more research. Don't be afraid of what you know. That's how we're going to spread this message. Be a seed of consciousness. Be bold. Be brave. Be ready to take the onslaught of all those that don't understand what the hell you're talking about. They're going to want to beat you up, but that's okay. If I could survive, you will too. And really, just don't be afraid. Thanks very much for coming, and I hope I gave you some food for thought. And travel safely. Cheers. Thanks, people. Thank you. Thank you very much. No. Be brave. This is the time of enlightenment. Yes. Thank you, people. Go home.